There's lots of ways to win at the Pokemon TCG, and today's deck is one that, if it works, could potentially have me taking all 6 prize cards in just a couple of turns. Right now in the 825 deck challenge, of the 5 decks I've created so far, 3 of them have been meta champions, meaning I'm currently in the positive, which is why today's deck was really so not viable, but built and played as if I was playing with house money. Let's head to the wheel to see which Pokemon in the 825 deck challenge will be the focus of today's deck. We're trying a new wheel spin sound today, so let's put it to use and let me know if you guys like it better. Umbreon. I'm thankful that this isn't live because I'm big into blinging out my decks in real life, and well, I don't have that kind of cash to deck out an Umbreon deck. Umbreon EX is one of the most talked about cards at the moment, but I'll be honest, leading into this challenge, I had no idea what Umbreon's attacks actually did. The first attack, Moon Mirage, does 160 damage and leaves the opponent's active Pokemon confused. Then its second attack, Onix, needs 3 different types of energy, and allows you to take a prize card if you discard the attached energy. I was instantly sold and all in on trying to make a cheese deck all around Onix. How could I speedrun taking prize cards? That was the question of the day. I looked to Roaring Moon EX, a card that's seen a lot of competitive play in rogue decks due to its 3 energy Frenzied Gouging attack, which knocks out your opponent's Pokemon and does 200 damage to yourself. Risky attack with a high reward. In this deck, it helped with just taking those fast prize cards. And now I began leaning into the silliness of it all, because Umbreon and Roaring Moon would definitely allow me to take prize cards, but imagine if I turned over a prize card and got to take an additional prize card for taking a prize card, and maybe another after that. This is Chansey from 151. Chansey's lucky bonus ability activates when Chansey is drawn as a prize card. It allows you to put Chansey on your bench if there's room, and then flip a coin. If heads, you can take another prize card. One of those lucky based abilities that I would never count on in an actual deck, but here, I was too attached to the vision using Umbreon's Onix and then drawing a Chansey from prizes only to get to take another prize card in another Chansey. Then I went looking for other prize manipulating cards. Of course Iron Hands exists, but that seems too easy here. Especially since I'd be running other energy acceleration cards, it really would make sense for me to run it, but no, not today. Instead of Iron Hands, I found Ribombee. It only does 30 damage, but if the defending Pokemon is knocked out on my next turn, I'd get to take 2 extra prize cards, potentially allowing for a 4 prize turn if I could transition that into Roaring Moon on an EX, and imagine if those prizes were Chansey. I also discovered Sigilyph, who seemed like a niche scenario Pokemon that would be good to have in a pinch, as its 3 energy attack victory symbol declares you the victor if you have only 1 prize card remaining. Lastly for Pokemon, I went the route of Togekiss, whose ability Wonder Kiss when you knock out a Pokemon allows you to flip a coin and if heads take an additional prize card. There was so much potential for prize stacking. But how was I going to guarantee that these things were all able to trigger to let me take as many prizes as possible when I'd get a knockout? Well, I couldn't guarantee it, as I knew looking at my damage output and energies needed, I'd have to be scrappy. But I'd include some Ciphermaniac's Codebreakers, as well as Journey Together's Redeemable Ticket, for a duo that would set me up for success here. If I Ciphermaniac'd Chanseys into the top 2 slots of my deck, I could Redeemable Ticket to guarantee at least 1 or 2 Chanseys would be in my prizes. The vision was so clear. For other trainers, I went with Janine Secret Art to double attach Dark Energy to Umbreon and Roaring Moon EX, then Sparkling Crystal as my A-Spec for Umbreon EX to have 1 less energy to have to discard when using Onix. Other trainer cards included Arven to find the tools in the deck like Powerglass and Sparkling Crystal, as well as of course, Chef Crispin. Thanks by the way for the insight on Crispin. I'd trust him to make my breakfast, that's for sure. Look at him. Lastly, I have some Nest Balls to bring out Pokemon when needed, and Super Rods and Night Stretchers to help bring back energy since it'd be going away if discarded by Umbreon or when Roaring Moon gets knocked out. I knew this deck wasn't going to be any meta-shifting force to be reckoned with, but it seemed like a goofy time, and I was laughing at the potential. Would it be a meta champion, or would it be a Veluza loser? It was time to see how the deck handled. In my first match, I was going second, and I started Roaring Moon EX inactive and had actually a pretty great starting hand. I instantly threw a Dark Energy into my discard using my Earthen Vessel to grab some more energy. Attached a Dark Energy to my Roaring Moon and Arven for a Nest Ball and Powerglass. The Nest Ball let me get Eevee EX onto my bench and Powerglass onto my active Roaring Moon, allowing for 2 energy attachment to Roaring Moon on this turn and for Eevee to be ready to evolve into Umbreon very soon. My opponent looked to be setting up a Hydreigon and Pidgeot, but also Iono'd on their turn, mixing up the beautiful energy I had in my hand and giving me something not so desirable. 2 Ciphermaniacs and 2 Chanseys. Chanseys were the card I'd want to see the least, because if I was seeing Chanseys in my hand, it meant that they were not in my prizes serving their purpose. Additionally, Ciphermaniac was in there to be combined with Redeemable Ticket, but without Redeemable Ticket in my hand, Ciphermaniac was less beneficial. It was all good though. I'd be able to use Ciphermaniac to put Umbreon and Crispin into the top 2 cards of my deck so that I'd be sure to draw them in my next 2 turns. A great plan, but hilariously thwarted by the Hydreigon EX, who came out and next turn did 200 damage to my Roaring Moon, as well as discarded the top 3 cards on my deck, including Crispin, Umbreon, and an additional Chansey. I should have seen this coming. I literally just put those cards there just to be tossed into discard. Oof. I struck back though, using my Roaring Moon to full Frenzy Gouge and knock out both itself and the Hydreigon EX. Side note, I've always called Hydreigon Hydreigon, so this is very, very difficult. I just learned yesterday during the Black Bolt White Flare release that it's Hydreigon and not Hydreigon, so whole new world. I was then stuck in a Badoo lock for a few turns as I couldn't find my other Umbreon and my opponent was building up another Hydreigon. Eventually, I was able to build up a Roaring Moon around the same time as they built up a Hydreigon, took out Badoo, and then had to play a bit of a game of chicken by moving Umbreon into active and taking a single prize card, knowing Umbreon would get taken down on the following turn. This kept my Roaring Moon engaged though and able to move back into the active and bring the game to a sudden death. And with my Pokemon in tow, I had a few funny options in this format where we each only had 1 prize card to take in order to win. What I really wanted to do was get the N Sigilyph charged up quickly to be able to win using the Victory Signal attack, but the cards instead had me trying to build up Umbreon instead. Onix would do the trick. Using Moon Mirage, Hydreigon was left confused and active, and with no other Pokemon to utilize, my opponent was left with no choice but to swing, with the coin flip not in my favor. I didn't draw into any additional energy, so I had to use Moon Mirage again, confusing my opponent, and then it went back to my opponent's side, who had to flip for the game. But alas, with flashbacks to Probopass, the coins were against me, and the flip was not in my favor. Another thing that came out of this matchup was Ribombee. Ribombee is a stage 1 Pokemon, I guess, meaning I needed Cutiefly in my deck as well if I wanted to utilize it, and I just wasn't interested in running a stage 1 Pokemon here. So Ribombee, love you, loved what you do, but I had to say goodbye. The next casual matchup I played, I'm going to show you the whole thing because it was a quick one. Starting with Chansey in active and no other basics at my disposal, I felt not great. Then I felt even worse when across from me I saw a Charmander. What I didn't anticipate was that my opponent was either truly bricked or asleep at the wheel, because after what was essentially a pass back to me, Crispin allowed Chansey to land the perfect damage and catch me a casual win. My final casual match started the same way with just Chansey inactive, but this time things were not as lucky. Against the very meta Marnie's Grimmsnarl, the little gremlins did their little devil dance and kablooied me. This deck was so much fun to play because of the potential, not the performance, if that makes sense. I still hadn't pulled off the perfect turn of getting Chanseys into the prizes, but I was determined. In fact, I hoped that in my next match I'd be pulling this move off because my next match was the one for all the marbles. Here it is, folks. Heading into TCG Live Competitive, the final matchup to determine if my Umbreon deck is a Veluza loser or a meta champion. The match started with 2 Duskulls and my Eevee inactive, with me going first. I double Nest Balled and saw I had one of my Chanseys in prizes, which was big for me, because it seemed like up until now, all of my Chanseys had dodged prizes frequently. I got a Togepi and Roaring Moon out, put a single energy onto Eevee, and passed. My opponent started with a Buddy Buddy for Badoo and Duskull, and then a concede. I won. Probably my lineup on the bench, probably very, very intimidating. Alright, so this win might be controversial, because did this deck have any place winning? Absolutely not. Did it though? Yes, and a win is a win, especially in ranked, and so this deck is a meta champion. But I wasn't content with that. Even though its status would remain undisputed as a meta champion, I didn't feel like I truly got to test it out in the brutal world of ranked, so I went in one more time. In this match, I started with Roaring Moon inactive and Eevee on my bench. I also had both my Umbreons in hand, which caught me off guard, as at points in my other matches with this deck, I had seriously struggled to get Umbreon out. But here he was, served to me on a silver platter. But of course, in exchange, I had access to only a single energy in hand. Hopefully that would change as the match went on. Able to place a single Dark Energy on my turn onto Roaring Moon, I passed, hoping to evolve up my Umbreon next turn. But Iono and the Itchmeister would have other plans. I would draw into more favorable energy access this time, but less energy attached, so I would just attach an energy and pass yet again. The whole time, my opponent was building up the dynamic duo of meta Pokemon, Charizard EX and Dragapult EX. I was actually faced with a bit of a tricky situation, as I found myself with the option to KO Badoo. However, I didn't think I wanted to, because KOing Badoo would put Charizard EX both inactive and with the damage necessary to eliminate Roaring Moon. But if I didn't knock out Badoo, I would be buying myself one more turn to get energy onto Eevee and hopefully get Umbreon in play. And while this move paid off, and I took out the Badoo on my next turn, it didn't matter because I made a mistake by not putting a Chansey in my hand onto the bench to use as cannon fodder for the Charizard EX, because things were about to absolutely fall apart. And at the worst time too, because in my hand I finally got the combination of Redeemable Ticket and Ciphermaniac's Codebreaking, the cards I'd been wanting this whole time. It wouldn't matter because Unfair Stamp would come down, and while my game went from Umbreon to Umbreoff, after Roaring Moon got taken out by a Dragapult EX, I'd finally get Umbreon out, but would be short in energy that I would never find, and with Chansey in the one place I never wanted it, active, this match would be wrapped. I laughed this whole time though, because my opponent probably thought I was delusional for trying to play this deck, especially into such a try-hard deck like Polten Zard, and I do feel a level of guilt that this deck made its way to meta champion. But I highly recommend that you take this deck for a spin yourself. Not in ranked, keep it far away from ranked. Just throw it into casual, and maybe doctor it up as well. The full deck list is in the description below, and before I close out today, I'm actually going to switch things up, because today we're ending on a wheel spin for next episode's Pokemon. That's right, moving forward, the wheel spin will come at the end of each episode, rather than the beginning. So for the second time this episode, let's toss it to the wheel. 819 Pokemon are currently on the wheel, and even though I'll keep this titled as the 825 deck challenge, next week I'll also be adding in all the additional Pokemon that aren't already on the wheel, but are now in rotation as a result of Black Bolt and White Flare. Alright, let's spin that wheel. Thwacky. Pretty much this means I'm legally required to play some variation of Festival Lead, a deck that I've played against plenty but have never piloted myself. Alright folks, thanks so much for tuning in, and Thwacky and I will catch you next time on the 825 Deck Challenge.